Africans came to America before Columbus as explorers. Africans came to America as immigrants and as indentured servants. Africans came to America in the bowels of ships, named and unnamed, to clear the land, work the fields, build the plantations, towns, and cities, as slaves. Hallem. His grayed hair is hidden under a well-worn floppy fedora. A thick bushy mustache conceals a good portion of his leathery brown facial features while being complementary to the gray stubble that covers his chin. His clothes have the cut of a 19th-century Eastern gentleman who has been wearing them daily for quite a few years. It is from these slaves that laid the foundations upon which America was built, in whom that the vast majority of modern-day black Americans can find a common history. A history of survival, perseverance, and success, the basis for a nationwide, extended family. It is time for us to rejoice. It is time for us to reflect. It is time for us to move forward, confident in the realization that knowledge of the past provides us with the strength and the will to meet any challenge in the future. Of this, I am certain. Why am I certain? Because I've been there. I am Hallem, keeper of the flame of knowledge. My time here will soon be ended. I am compelled by those who have gone before me to pass along to you what I have seen and heard. Listen closely so that you might learn from the stories related herein. He escaped from Mrs. Gillespie's estate on the Black River. They had stretched him out on the ground and tied his hands and feet to stakes. Handfuls of dry corn husks were lighted, and red-hot embers allowed to fall down in a rain shower of flesh, searing sparks, until his back was covered with blisters. The blisters were then broken with the jagged teeth of a handsaw. His recovery was long and slow, but he vowed no more to be a slave, subjected to the cruelty of other men, unable to fight back. He clawed and stumbled his way for many days and nights, through swamps and bayous. To escape the bloodhounds, he had with him onions, which after crossing a creek or swamp, he rubbed himself freely all over, until from head to foot, his scent was that of the onions. His clothes were torn and covered with all manner of debris as he entered the lines of the Army of the United States. He became a scout, leading troops where once he had been hounded and hunted by slavers. His name is Gordon. His is not the story of one man, but of many, many thousands of black slaves who fought as Union soldiers against the armies of the Confederacy, against injustice, tyranny, and inhumanity. Her birthplace was Dorchester County, Maryland. It is said that she alone led more than 300 of her comrades out of bondage. They called her Moses. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. Back she went again and again, 19 or 20 times in all. A conductor she was, frail, yet fearless. She led the way for her mother, father, sister, and 2 children along a railway that had no tracks, no cars, no steam locomotive. Determination was the only fuel. Hers was a caravan of people, driven by the need to be free. They sought a way out of this desert that would lead to a saving oasis. She would begin her journey on a Saturday night, along rivers and streams, into valleys and across mountains. The train lines all led north. Once you climbed aboard her train, there was no turning back. No coward was she, and no cowardice among her charges would she accept. It was a one-way ticket that was purchased on this underground railroad. And the trail conductor, who had to overcome recurring dizzy spells, who would punch your ticket if you tried turning back, was one Harriet Tubman. To spend one's life in bondage has a powerful effect on the mind as well as the body. The peculiar institution, as some intellectuals of the day called slavery, spawned moral, economic, social, and spiritual justifications for the inhuman system, which allowed one human being to feel right in treating another human being as property. To counter this state of affairs, making one's voice heard through the printed word could achieve an independence of mind and spirit for both the writer and the reader. Her words were first published in 1770 in poetic form. As a young girl, her owners have allowed their property to cultivate her mind. Learning to read, she became interested in history, astronomy, geography, and the classics. Later, given back her personhood through manumission, she journeyed to England. There her lyric poetry became popular. While her voice does not address the questions surrounding the peculiar institution, she was living proof that it was possible for a woman born on the dark continent of Africa to give pleasure to others, not with her body, but by the liberating constructs of her mind. This woman poet was Phyllis Wheatley. Wade in the water, wade in the water, children. The song was sung by workers in the fields to let those who were laying low while making their freedom dash, that the overseer and slave catchers had brought the dogs, and it was time to make for the nearby creek or river to throw off the scent and confuse the hounds. He was known to be intelligent and a man in whom one could place his or her trust. His genius as an orator was first displayed at an anti-slavery convention held in Nantucket in 1841. 3 years after his marriage and escape from bondage of human servitude. He taught himself to read and write. It was against the law to teach a slave to read and write. If kept ignorant and illiterate, slaves could more easily be controlled. He would have none of that. In 1845, His autobiography was published, and while on a lecture tour in England, friends purchased his freedom. When John Brown made his celebrated raid on Harper's Ferry, this noted abolitionist was the publisher of the North Star, a Rochester, New York weekly. His influence was such that Governor Wise of Virginia endeavored to have him arrested for supposed complicity with Brown. He exiled himself abroad for 4 months. When the Civil War broke out, he lobbied fiercely for the use of colored soldiers in the conflict and for the emancipation of all slaves in the South. Abolitionist, orator, lecturer, publisher, statesman, and former slave. His name, Frederick Douglass. That they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The Declaration of Independence. And 11 years later, in 1787, the same men who staged a revolution with that document would declare, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America." Noble sentiments, but the founding fathers of these United States, let us not forget, condoned and were themselves owners of other human beings, men, women, and children whom they considered property. Not men, not beings created equal. Equality for this human property had to be fought for, bought and paid for in blood, sweat, and tears. Black people had to purchase their citizenship, and like the founders of the colonies, fight to become Americans. It is the night of March 5th, 1770. Snow is falling, and the cold wind is swirling with anti-British colonial sentiments. An unruly crowd of patriots are taunting a company of British soldiers in front of the King Street Customs House. After being pelted with snowballs and otherwise challenged, the soldiers opened fire. The first to fall dead from 2 bullets in his chest was a 6'2", 47-year-old seaman. He has been called martyr, firebrand, rabble-rouser, and rioter. In truth, he was an escaped slave, having shed his bondage in 1750. Sailed from Boston Harbor for 20 years. He no doubt felt strongly about the new navigation acts imposed upon the colony by the British, having, along with other colonists, felt the need to protest the quartering of British soldiers in the city. Be not afraid, they dare not fire. Why not crush them at once? He moved toward the armed troops. The first to fall in what came to be a pivotal event in galvanizing colonial sentiments against the British oppressors. The Boston Massacre's Crispus Attucks was a black man. The revolutionary fighting was in full flower. The Americans were forcefully wresting their independence away from kingly domination. The British army of King George was just as determined to see that the Americans remained British subjects. In between were the Negroes, some freedmen, but the majority were slaves who, like their colonial counterparts, wanted to be free. The British offered slaves freedom to fight for England. The colonial army first enlisted only free black volunteers and slaves who fought in place of their drafted white owners. It was not until the British offer of freedom that the Continental Congress rescinded an earlier order allowing free blacks into the army. And when General Washington saw his manpower needs become so critical that defeat was close at hand, he opened the ranks to any black man who wished to fight, slave or free. Of the 300,000 soldiers who fought for the freedom of the colonies, 5,000 were black. April 24th, 1851. Caution, colored people of Boston, one and all. You are hereby respectfully cautioned and advised to avoid conversing with watchmen and police officers of Boston. For since the recent order of the mayor and aldermen, they are empowered to act as kidnappers and slave catchers. May 20th, 1788. A judge sentenced a slave to be severely lashed for purchasing stolen goods. Before the sentence was carried out, the slave addressed the court. The thief from whom I purchased the goods was a white man. Judge, if caught, will he be punished? The judge replied, of course. Then said the slave, you must punish my master also. The goods I bought had no parents, but my master purchased me, knowing I was stolen from my mother and father. Punishment was set aside. From the New York Times, June 14th, 1886. Atlanta, Georgia, June 12th. The Supreme Court of the state today sustained the will of the late David Dixon. This makes Amanda Eubanks the richest Negro in America, with a fortune of $500,000. He died a bachelor, having many white relatives anxious for his property. They were disgusted, as well as disappointed, when they discovered that 7/8 of his possessions were left to a colored woman and her daughter, Amanda. September 1829. Are we men, I ask you? Are we men? Did our Creator make us to be slaves to dust and ashes like ourselves? Are they not dying worms as well as we? How we could be so submissive to a gang of men, whom we cannot tell whether they are as good as ourselves or not, I never conceive. America is more our country than it is the whites. We have enriched it with our blood and tears. The greatest riches in all America have arisen from our blood and tears, and they will drive us from our property and homes, which we have earned with our blood. Author and militant abolitionist, David Walker. Mississippi Governor Quitman declared that between 1810 and 1850, the South lost 100,000 slaves valued at more than $30 million. $100 reward. Runaway on or about the 15th of March, a Negro man named Ned, about 22 years of age, short, black, one front tooth missing. In 1800, when condemned to die for plotting a slave revolt in Virginia, Gabriel Prosser looked the judge in the eye and said, "You only do to me what the British would have done to George Washington had they caught him." Nat Turner, the black revolutionist of 1831, rebuked another slave for bowing and scraping before a white man. "But we are slaves," said the fellow. Nat replied, "You deserve to be." In 1910, the Census Bureau revealed data that showed of all African Americans in the United States, 99.2% were native-born, while in contrast, of the white Americans residing in the U.S., only 60% were born in the USA.
What?